What's gaming, gamers? Today, I've got a Void Titan build for you using the No Backup Plan's exotic arms. This build takes advantage of Overshields, shotguns, and Devour to be incredibly survivable, and it thrives especially in solo content where your kills won't get stolen by your pesky teammates. This build can allow your shotguns to deal up to 221% more damage than normal if you use this build properly. But before I get into how that's done, I'll explain how the No Backup Plan's exotic arms work in case you're not aware. No Backup Plans is a Titan Arms exotic armor piece with the exotic perk Force Multiplier. Force Multiplier will grant any shotguns you have equipped an increase to their damage, reload speed, and airborne effectiveness while you have a Void Overshield active. Additionally, rapidly defeating enemies with shotguns, or simply defeating one major enemy with a shotgun, will grant you an Overshield and start health regeneration. This means getting kills with your shotguns will grant the shotguns themselves all of the aforementioned buffs. While your Void Overshield is active, Shotgun Final Blows will refresh the Overshield's health and duration. For specific numbers, while Void Overshield is active, shotguns are granted 35% extra damage and plus 30 to their airborne effectiveness stat. Unfortunately, I don't know what the reload speed increase is, but in line with the airborne effectiveness increase, my assumption is it's probably around a plus 30 increase as well. Now that you're aware of what No Backup Plans does, I'll get into the subclasses build. I'll first put everything on screen as a prescriptive setup if that's what you prefer, and then get into detail about what each subclass element does, why I've chosen it, and any alternative options should there be any. For your super, run Ward of Dawn. Run the Rally Barricade, whichever jump you prefer, the Shield Bash melee, the Suppressor Grenade, the Bastion aspect, the Offensive Bulwark aspect, Echo of Domineering, Echo of Persistence, Echo of Starvation, and Echo of Vigilance. To detail the subclass build, I'll first go over the Ward of Dawn super. As Overshields are the centerpiece of this build, Ward of Dawn will grant you a significantly stronger Overshield as well as the ability to instantly refresh the Overshield if it gets destroyed by simply walking back into the bubble. Normally, Overshields have 45 health and grant you a 50% damage resistance to all incoming damage. Ward of Dawn's Overshield is significantly stronger, granting you a 300 health Overshield. It still has the same 50% damage resistance, but the Overshield having 6.7 times the amount of health as a regular Overshield makes it that much more valuable for this build. For the Barricade, I prefer to run Rally Barricade exclusively because its cooldown is shorter than that of the Towering Barricade. Normally, Rally Barricade's base cooldown is 38 seconds, and Towering Barricade's base cooldown is 48 seconds. However, with the Bastion aspect equipped, both barricades get their cooldowns significantly increased. Rally Barricade becomes 80 seconds, and Towering Barricade becomes 100 seconds. As such, Rally Barricade having a 20-second shorter cooldown than Towering Barricade makes it the obvious choice for me. Onto the melee ability, the Shield Bash melee is the better option as it will grant you a full Overshield if you get a kill with it, and if you don't kill the enemy you hit with it, it will suppress them. The Shield Throw melee also grants you an Overshield, but the health of the Overshield it grants you is only 15 HP per hit. If it ricochets and hits 3 total enemies, you'll get a full Overshield, but I find Shield Bash to be more consistent. Shield Bash also has the extra utility of suppressing, and with that you can decide whether you want to get a full Overshield by killing an ad with it, or suppress a major and prevent them from shooting for the duration of the suppress effect. For the grenade, the Suppressor Grenade is chosen as it synergizes with both the Echo of Domineering fragment and the Season 21 artifact. Suppressor Grenade will, as the name implies, suppress any enemy damaged by the grenade. Suppressed enemies can't use abilities or shoot their weapons and are removed from any of their current abilities. This doesn't affect bosses, but the suppression effect will stun overload champions, so it has a bit of extra utility there. Onto the aspects, firstly, Bastion. Bastion. Bastion will cause the casting of your super to grant a Void Overshield to nearby allies. This is decent for group play, but doesn't make a difference when playing solo. Where Bastion shines is the fact that your barricades will grant you an Overshield while standing behind them. This is incredibly beneficial for this build, as it grants you an instant, easy source of Overshield in case yours breaks at an inopportune time. Bastion does increase the base cooldown of your barricade, but this is remedied with Armour mods and doesn't change its utility of being an instant source of Overshield. The second aspect is Offensive Bulwark. Offensive Bulwark will increase the utility of your Overshields and your Ward of Dawn. While you either have an Overshield or are inside of your Ward of Dawn, you will gain a 400% increase to your grenade's recharge rate, a 100% increase to your melee's damage, and will increase your melee's lunge distance. Furthermore, unpowered melee damage while you have an Overshield or are inside a Ward of Dawn will count as powered melee damage, which will help it synergize with Armour mods. Offensive Bulwark will also allow melee final blows to extend the duration of your Overshield by 6 seconds per kill, up to 20 seconds total. Lastly, if using the Sentinel Shield Super, Offensive Bulwark will grant you an additional shield throw while the super is active. For the fragments, firstly, Echo of Domineering. Upon suppressing a target, Echo of Domineering will grant you 30 points to your mobility stat, an additional extra 4% forward movement speed, and it refills the magazine of whatever weapon you're currently holding from reserves. Echo of Domineering's buffs last 10 seconds and cannot be refreshed during these 10 seconds. Furthermore, Echo of Domineering will summon a Void Breach upon the death of any suppressed enemy, which will be very beneficial for this build. Void Breaches will grant you 12.5% class ability energy upon pickup, and will also grant you Devour when collected due to the Echo of Starvation fragment. Void Breaches can only be created once every 5 seconds, but the class ability energy gained is very beneficial as the Bastion aspect increases your barricade cooldown significantly. Echo of Domineering will also increase your discipline stat by 10 points, which will help your grenade passively recharge just that little bit faster. The second fragment is Echo of Persistence. Echo of Persistence will increase the duration of void buffs applied to you. These buffs are Invisibility, Overshield, and Devour. As this build has no way of becoming invisible, the increased Overshield and Devour durations are the only ones to worry about. Both of these buffs have their durations increased by a flat 5 seconds when received from any source. This means Overshields will last for 15 seconds, and as I'll talk about shortly, Devour will last for 10 seconds. The increased durations of both buffs are very helpful, as it allows them to be carried between engagements if necessary, as well as allowing you more time to get a kill after having activated one of them. Echo of Persistence does lower your resilience stat by 10 points, but the increase to the duration of the Overshield can help to nullify the decreased damage resistance. The third fragment is Echo of Starvation. Echo of Starvation will grant you the Devour buff for 5 seconds upon the collection of either an Orb of Power or a Void Breach. Due to Echo of Persistence, Devour is granted for 10 seconds instead of its base 5 seconds, which is very helpful for ensuring you have enough time to keep it active. The Devour buff will do 2 things for this build. Firstly, it will fully heal you upon getting a kill. Because of no backup plans, rapid shotgun kills or killing a powerful enemy with a shotgun will instantly start health regeneration. However, this health regeneration can be interrupted by taking damage, whereas Devour's instant full heal is just that, instant. In addition to this instant full heal, Devour also grants you grenade energy for every kill while it's active. Depending on the tier of enemy killed, Devour will grant you between 7.5% and 20% grenade energy per kill. This will be very helpful for your suppressor grenade's uptime, which in turn increases your suppression uptime and, by extension of that, your Void Breach creation capabilities. Lastly, every kill while Devour is active will increase its duration by 5 seconds, which means as long as you get a kill at least once every 5 seconds, you can extend Devour's duration indefinitely. Echo Starvation does lower your recovery stat by 10 points, but receiving full health every time you kill an enemy effectively eliminates that as a detriment. Lastly for fragments is Echo of Vigilance. Echo of Vigilance will grant you an Overshield upon getting a kill while at critical health. This Overshield will last for 5 seconds without Echo of Persistence, and oddly 7.5 seconds with Echo of Persistence. If you find yourself at critical health, a kill-granting Overshield will help to keep you alive that much longer. It also procs the No Backup Plans buffs, which means your shotguns will be dealing more damage, in turn making it easier to get out of the situation in which you became critical health. Echo of Vigilance does have a hidden intrinsic 8-second cooldown, meaning you can only be granted its Overshield once every 8 seconds. Additionally, Echo of Vigilance comes with a -10 penalty to your recovery stat, which is something you'll have to take into account when putting together your armor build. With the subclass build now done, I'll get into seasonal artifact mods if you're playing during Season 21, the Season of the Deep. On screen, you're seeing the artifact setup I use when running this build, and I'll highlight the important mods now. In the first column, simply run whatever anti-champion mods you need for the content you'll be running. In the second column, first run the Authorized Melee mod. Authorized Melee will lower the cost of any armor mods that affect your melee ability to a cost of 1 energy, which will allow you to slot more into your armor. Next, run whichever Authorized Affinity mod corresponds with the shotgun or shotguns you'll be running. I generally run a Strand and a Void shotgun, and as such I use the Authorized Strand and Void mods, but if you run an Arc shotgun in your energy or heavy slot, the Authorized Arc mod would be the one to choose. Again, these will simply lower the cost of armor mods that affect that specific affinity weapon to a cost of 1 energy, allowing you to slot more mods into your armor. In the third column, run the Unto the Breach mod. Unto the Breach will cause the defeat of any Void debuffed target to summon a Void Breach. This does encroach somewhat on the effectiveness of the Echo of Domineering fragment, but it also causes Void Breaches to be able to be summoned more often, which is just beneficial for this build in general. In the fourth column, the Protective Breach mod will either grant you or refresh your current Overshield upon picking up a Void Breach. This simply increases your Overshield uptime, in turn increasing this build's effectiveness. Lastly, in the fifth column, run the Supernova mod. Upon the collection of a Void Breach, the Supernova mod will grant you the Supernova Readied buff for 10 seconds. Dealing void damage while this buff is active will cause the enemy damaged to release a weakening pulse, which will apply the Void Weaken debuff to the enemy damaged and any surrounding enemy for 10 seconds. As you'll be collecting Void Breaches constantly, this weakening pulse will also be procced often, allowing you to clear groups of enemies more efficiently. With the seasonal artifact now done, I'll get into the armor setup for this build. I'll first go over my recommendations for stat distribution. In the top 3 stat grouping of Mobility, Resilience, and Recovery, spec into Resilience first, with Recovery second, and effectively ignore Mobility. Resilience will be very strong for this build, and I recommend either tier 9 or 10. Every tier of Resilience will grant you an additional 3% damage resistance to all sources of damage, up to a maximum of 30% at tier 10. This is invaluable, as you'll be within close proximity of enemies very frequently with this build, and subject to a large amount of damage constantly. Recovery is less important than Resilience, but it can still be useful. Recovery will lower the delay between taking damage and your health and shields regenerating, which can be very useful if you have no means of gaining an Overshield and need to heal quickly. Recovery also increases the rate at which you regenerate both your health and shields, making you heal faster overall. As this build will have the Devour buff frequently, Recovery isn't as important as Resilience, but is very useful if you can't proc Devour and don't have an Overshield for protection. Mobility is the least important stat in the top 3 grouping, as it doesn't do much for Titans in general. It simply increases your move speed and jump height, which aren't as helpful for this build as flat damage resistance and health regeneration are. Furthermore, the Echo of Domineering fragment will grant you plus 30 to your mobility stat upon suppressing any target for 10 seconds, which will basically be procced constantly, thus making speccing into the mobility stat itself even less useful. For the bottom 3 stat grouping of Discipline, Intellect, and Strength, spec into Strength first, with Discipline second, and Intellect third. Speccing into Strength is the most important, as the Shield Bash melee is both a source of suppressing targets and Overshields. The Strength stat will decrease the base cooldown of your melee ability, and is very helpful for increasing the uptime of your melee ability. Discipline is less important than Strength for this build. Even though the suppressor grenades are a source of suppress, and are arguably easier to use for suppression purposes than the Shield Bash melee, the Devour buff will be constantly granting you grenade energy. This means that a high discipline stat is somewhat wasted, as your grenade can be actively recharged with this build instead of relying on passive regeneration. Lastly, Intellect is the least important stat in the bottom 3 stat grouping. I still recommend having at least 30 points in Intellect, as anything less than 30 points will increase the amount of time it takes for your super to recharge, but there's not much reason to go above 30 points either. My armor stats have me at 21 mobility, 90 resilience, 51 recovery, 61 discipline, 40 intellect, and 90 strength. With stat distribution now out of the way, I'll get into a prescriptive armor mod setup for use with this build. I'll put everything on screen now in case you'd simply like to copy it, and once I'm done naming all of the mods, I'll go into detail about what each mod does and why I've chosen it. On the helmet, run siphon mods that correspond with whatever shotgun you're running, and a special ammo finder if you can fit it. On the arms, run a bolstering detonation mod, a focusing strike mod, and a momentum transfer mod. On the chest piece, simply run whatever resistance mods you need for the content you'll be running. On the legs, run one absolution mod, one invigoration mod, and one recuperation mod. On the mark, run an outreach mod and 2 utility kickstart mods. To detail the mods and the reasons behind their choosing, I'll first start on the helmets mods. The siphon mods will cause an orb of power to be summoned upon getting multi-kills with guns that correspond to the affinity of the siphon mod, and as such, it's important you run a siphon mod with the same affinity as the shotgun or shotguns you use. With this season's artifact, if you're running a strand, arc, or void shotgun, the siphon mods for these affinities will only cost 1 energy. This means, alongside both of the siphon mods, you can fit a special ammo finder mod. Special ammo finder will increase the amount of special ammo you get, which will increase your shotgun's overall effectiveness as it'll have ammo more often. If you can't fit a special ammo finder in your helmet, that's fine. It's not very necessary, and the siphon mods are more important. For the mods on the arms, firstly, the bolstering detonation mod. With one bolstering detonation mod equipped, you'll be granted 20% class ability energy upon dealing any damage with your grenade ability. This will do very well to increase the uptime of your barricade, whose cooldown is significantly longer than normal due to the bastion aspect. Bolstering detonation operates on a hidden 7-second cooldown, meaning you can only get this 20% grenade energy once every 7 seconds. The focusing strike mod is very similar to bolstering detonation. Upon dealing any melee damage, you'll be granted 20% grenade energy. However, unlike bolstering detonation requiring your grenade to be charged and thrown, Focusing Strike will proc on unpowered melee damage too, meaning even if your shield bash isn't recharged, you can still get the 20% grenade energy from the mod. Focusing Strike has a similar 7-second cooldown to bolstering detonation, meaning you can only get the grenade energy from melee damage once every 7 seconds. Lastly, the Momentum Transfer mod will grant you 20% melee ability energy upon dealing damage with your grenade. This will proc at the same time the bolstering detonation mod does, and as such, will share the same 7-second hidden cooldown. Momentum Transfer will be very helpful for keeping your melee ability charged, as its suppression and overshield properties are very helpful for this build in general, meaning its uptime is important. I would recommend against using a melee kickstart mod, as it will clash with the utility kickstart mods later, and your barricade is more important than the melee ability. For the mods on the chest piece, simply run whatever resistance mods you need for the content you'll be running. I generally run 2 of whatever element the threat modifier is, if the activity has one, and a concussive dampener alongside them. For the mods on the legs, firstly, the Absolution mod will grant you 5% energy to all 3 of your abilities upon the collection of an Orb of Power. This will work to grant you just that little bit of extra ability energy when collecting Orbs of Power, and as you'll be generating them often with the Siphon mods in your helmet, you'll get this extra ability energy frequently. Next, the Invigoration mod itself will grant you 10% melee ability energy upon the collection of an Orb of Power. This stacks with Absolution, and together the 2 mods will grant you 15% ability energy upon collecting an Orb of Power. There is no cooldown for these mods, and they will grant you their ability energy every single time you pick up an Orb of Power. Lastly, the Recuperation mod will grant you 70 health upon the collection of an Orb of Power. Recuperation may get overshadowed by Devour most of the time, but Recuperation can be the difference between life and death when you're too far away from an enemy to kill them if there's an Orb of Power or 2 on the ground that you can pick up. For the Marks mods, the Outreach mod will grant you 12% melee ability energy upon the casting of your Barricade. This isn't a mod brought to be an active increase to your melee's energy. In other words, I don't recommend using your Barricade simply to get this melee energy. Instead, Outreach is brought for the slight boost to your melee's energy if it happens to be on cooldown when you need to cast your Barricade to proc an Overshield. As such, if you need to, you can completely forego the Outreach mod if you have a 4 energy cost stat increase mod slotted in your mark, as Outreach is less important than the utility kickstart mods. Speaking of utility kickstart, these mods will refund you a differing amount of class ability energy upon the casting of your Barricade, depending on the amount of stacks of armor charge you have when you cast it. With the 2 utility kickstart mods that are slotted with this build, if you have no armor charge when you cast your Barricade, you'll be refunded 17.15% of your class ability's energy. As this build doesn't make use of any charged up mods, the maximum amount of armor charge stacks you can hold are 3. With all 3 stacks of armor charge, plus the 2 utility kickstart mods, you'll be refunded 37.8% of your class ability's energy upon the casting of your Barricade. These mods will do phenomenally well for your class ability's uptime and are invaluable for making sure you have the instant Overshield on demand when you need it. With the Armor's mods now out of the way, I'll get into some weapon and weapon trait recommendations for this build. I'll first go over a couple of weapon traits and then get into some specific weapons that can roll the traits I mentioned. Firstly, as this build makes use of shotguns almost exclusively, the Trench Barrel perk is fantastic for this build. Trench Barrel will grant your shotgun 50% increased damage for either 5 seconds or 3 shots, whichever comes first after having dealt non-projectile melee damage. Trench Barrel will also grant your weapon an increase to both its reload speed and handling stats, although unfortunately I'm not sure exactly how significant these buffs are. Trench Barrel won't work with the shield throw melee, but it will work with both the shield bash powered melee and any unpowered melee attack. Trench Barrel's 50% damage boost will stack with no backup plan's 35% boost to shotguns while Overshield is active, which together will grant you a 102.5% boost to your shotgun's damage. If you enhance the Trench Barrel perk, it will increase both the reload speed and handling stat buffs granted when the perk is activated even further. Second, the Demolitionist perk will work very well to keep your grenade up as often as possible. If you have Demolitionist on a shotgun, it will grant you 20% grenade energy per kill with no cooldown. This is fantastic for your grenade's energy and will serve to ensure you can suppress enemies as often as you want. Additionally, throwing a grenade while you have a weapon with Demolitionist readied will reload the weapon from reserves, further increasing the utility Demolitionist offers. Enhancing the Demolitionist perk will cause shotgun kills to grant you 22% grenade energy instead of its base 20%. Third and lastly, the Pugilist perk will do almost exactly the same thing as Demolitionist, except it will grant you melee ability energy instead of grenade ability energy. Pugilist on a shotgun will grant you 20% melee ability energy per kill, making it very useful for your shield bash's uptime. Furthermore, dealing any melee damage while you have a weapon with Pugilist readied will grant that weapon 35 points to its handling stat for 3 seconds. Enhancing the Pugilist perk will increase the melee ability energy gains from 20% to 22% when getting kills with a shotgun. For specific weapons that are useful with this build, as this build is centered around shotguns, that's all I'll cover. Firstly, there isn't a single shotgun in the game that can roll a combination of both Trench Barrel and Demolitionist, so you'll have to decide which perk you want more. There are, however, 3 shotguns that can roll the combination of Trench Barrel and Pugilist. Those 3 guns are the Ikelos Shotgun V3 from the Season of the Seraph, the Imperial Decree Shotgun from focusing the recovered Leviathan weapons engram at the war table on the helm, and the Wastelander M5 shotgun from Dares of Eternity. All 3 of these guns are craftable, but the Ikelos shotgun currently isn't acquirable aside from waiting for either Banshee or Xur to sell it. As for Void shotguns, there's only one currently farmable that can roll the Trench Barrel perk, the Basso Ostinato shotgun, available from farming Terminal Overload in the Ahimsa Park region on Neomuna. Basso Ostinato is not craftable, but has a relatively small perk pool, making it not as bad to farm as some ritual weapons can be. As for exotic weapons, both Tractor Cannon and Legend of Acreus are good choices. Tractor Cannon will apply a 30% weaken debuff to any enemy hit for 10 seconds, making that enemy take 30% more damage from all sources for the duration of the effect. Tractor Cannon also suppresses enemies, which will proc Echo of Domineering and will instantly reload Tractor Cannon. Additionally, after having hit an enemy with Tractor Cannon, you'll receive a buff called Scientific Method for 5 seconds, which will max out both the handling stat on your weapons and your character's mobility stat. This will allow you to swap weapons and move incredibly quickly for its duration, which will be helpful for getting either closer to or further from enemies faster, whichever you need. The Legend of Acreus shotgun will also be very good, as its catalyst grants the Trench Barrel perk, making it do 50% more damage for 3 shots after having meleeed an enemy. This will deal significant damage to mini-bosses and bosses alike, making it a really good option if you don't want or need Tractor Cannon's debuff or suppression capabilities. With weapons now done, I'll detail a quick playstyle for use with this build. Firstly, either before or as you enter an engagement, get an Overshield in any way you can. This build has 4 main ways of generating one: getting a kill with your Shield Bash melee, using your Barricade, collecting a Void Breach with the Protective Breach artifact mod, and getting a multi-kill with your shotgun because of no backup plans. Echo of Vigilance will also grant you an Overshield when getting a kill while critical health, but this is not something to rely on actively and is more of a safety buffer if you find yourself at low health. Once you have an Overshield, go to town clearing enemies with your shotguns. Keep an eye on your health bar at the top of your screen, as your Overshield can break, thus removing the buffs it grants. If you notice it has been broken by enemy damage, simply reacquire your Overshield via any of the sources I've just mentioned. Personally, I find saving the Barricade until I am in dire need of an Overshield to be more useful than using it before an engagement, as it's the fastest way to instantly be guaranteed an Overshield and effectively can't be interrupted. But really, that's the whole loop. Proc your Overshield, kill enemies with your Overshield active, and continue doing so until all the enemies are dead. As for the 221% increased shotgun damage I mentioned at the beginning of the video, I'll detail how that's done now. Firstly, having an Overshield proc will grant your shotguns 35% increased damage. Second, the Trench Barrel weapon perk will increase the shotgun's damage by another 50%, increasing the total damage boost to 102.5%. Third, hitting an enemy with Tractor Cannon first will apply a 30% debuff to that enemy, meaning if you then shoot them with your shotgun while Trench Barrel and an Overshield are procced, you'll deal 163.25% increased damage. Lastly, if you're running 3 weapon surges in your legs and have any stacks of armor charge, that will increase your weapon's damage by a further 22%, increasing the total multiplicative damage increase to its maximum of 221.17%. And that's all for this video. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, liking and commenting helps me know you did. If you have any questions or constructive criticisms, please do let me know in the comments. I'd like to make these videos as good as possible, and your feedback helps me to do that. If you'd like to see more videos like this, subscribe. I'll be back next week with a Warlock build guide making use of an exotic I myself had never used before. Again, thanks for watching and have a great day.